What's up guys, George here, and I'm back from Cuba, and I thought I would share my experiences with you, soon as, having spent 6 days there, I'm obviously an expert. So Cuba, I mean, what can I say about Cuba? I mean, it's very much like every other Caribbean country I've ever been to, except it's Cuba. So the first thing I saw of Cuba was when I was coming in on the plane, there was a huge fire, and when I landed I noticed that there was a tremendous amount of black smoke over Havana. And the next day it was there as well. And I think it was only on the third day that I realised that it was oil that was being burnt 24 hours a day over Havana. That wasn't in the brochure, and it was really weird because you could smell it all the time. When you couldn't smell the street or food or anything like that, you could just smell burning oil. And really, that black cloud was one of the most interesting things about Havana. Apart from the nightlife, which was active but low-key, there really wasn't anything going on. There were a lot of people sat around who were obviously unemployed or underemployed, but there wasn't really much to do or see. There were a few museums, but most people just kind of seemed to be waiting for something. I don't know what, probably economic recovery. And that really brings me on to what I wanted to say about my experiences talking to Cuban people, which obviously is of a limited experience. But they were very Caribbean, you know, they were very genuinely friendly. But the difference between other Caribbean countries I've been to, and I hear it's like this in Jamaica, but I've never been there, was they were usually trying to sell something, but not in a scammy way. Not like in India where they would tell you a story or try and get you to go to a shop or anything like that, or trick you or kind of badger you. They would talk to you for 5 minutes, be very friendly. You talk to them a little bit. They'd kind of have this spiel memorized, but not really. And then they'd try and sell you cigars, and it was almost always cigars. But if you said no, you know, they were cool with it. They were really decent about it. But the real difference I felt with the Cuban people compared to other people, I've talked to who've tried to sell me stuff as a tourist, is I didn't really get the sense they were trying to scam me at all, or that they wanted my money. It was more that they were desperate. Yeah, and I talked to a lot of people who seemed pretty desperate. I met one old lady on a park bench. I was sat there admiring the architecture, and she was sat there as well, and she started talking to me after a while. And she asked me if I could give her some of my hotel soap. So I did. I went back to my hotel, and then I went to her apartment, which she gave me the address of, and I gave her my hotel soap. And I bought her some milk as well, because she hadn't had any, she said, for a number of months. Months, that's how you pronounce months. Months. And I was talking to her, and she told me that she got paid about $3 US a month for gas and electricity, and about $2.50 for food. And she only got paid that because they thought her son still lived with her. But you know, you go into a store and it's like US prices. More sometimes. A can of Pringles, which is obviously the international standard, was about $4. $4. Can you imagine paying $4 for Pringles? Jesus. But everything seemed quite expensive, but there were obviously places you could go that were cheaper. But the young Cubans I talked to said that the way they got by was basically by fiddling their electricity and things like that, so they didn't have to pay. And I suppose kind of committing social security fraud on a very low level. Clearly there was a huge amount of poverty, but I don't think anyone was destitute. You know, I don't think anyone was starving. And I would present a wild guess that there are less homeless people per capita in Havana than in London or New York. But of course, even if you do have money, you have a ration card or a stipend card, so you can't buy more than so much of a commodity, I guess to prevent syndicates or things like that. But essentially it's rationing. So, you know, it's a bit of a weird experience. You're walking around Cuba, and if the people aren't happy, they're at least calm. And it's a bit like a time warp. You know, you have all these classic cars going around, very few new cars. But, you know, there's kind of real squalor and real poverty. In fact, I'll show you a photo now. I don't want to make this into Happy Snap or anything, but the Capitol building is the only decently kept building in all of Havana. When I was there, it was getting new windows, which was absolutely astonishing to the locals. The photo I'm showing you right now is taken from the next street, in which tenement blocks, old-fashioned tenement blocks, had been allowed to collapse because they hadn't been maintained. They hadn't been demolished, They'd just collapsed. And this was pretty typical. Even the Revolutionary Museum, which is quite close to the Capitol building, and essentially a smaller version of it, had its windows broken. Some of its windows broken. So I went into the Revolutionary Museum, and I think, Cuban politics can kind of be summed up by the following fact. I went in there, and I saw that they had Fidel Castro's crib from when he was a baby. They had his belt from when he was a revolutionary. I mean, they had pretty much everything he'd ever worn. Maybe that's an exaggeration, but they had a lot of stuff he'd worn. A lot of photos of Fidel Castro. In fact, there was even a photo, probably about as high as me, so 5 feet, of a photo of Fidel Castro with children pouring at him. What is that? But, the most shocking thing, and really the only shocking thing for me about my visit to Havana, was in the Revolutionary Museum. I found the visitor book, which was almost all in Spanish, but not completely. And almost everything said, "Thank you so much, Fidel. Thank you for the revolution." And whether you're a socialist or not, right, regardless of your politics, just to look through Havana, I don't know how you could ever say that. I mean, I would walk through Havana, and I would walk through wastewater coming out of apartment buildings that people lived in. Apartment buildings with no windows or doors. Right? Apartment buildings that were propped up with wood, and they should have been demolished about 50 years ago. I just found it so weird that foreigners had written those things. People from Spain, from Bolivia, people from Germany, from all these different places. They'd written these things complimenting the revolution. And okay, fine, Fidel Castro might have been a revolutionary in 1959, just like Robert Mugabe might have been a force against vested interest in 1984. But he's not now. Honestly, if I didn't know a thing about Cuba and I just got there, I'd have said, oh, so there was a revolution about 4 years ago and the country's kind of just finding its feet. Or, my God, it looks like the country's on its knees. Because it does look like that. But, I guess the Cubans are just used to it. And it's not like there's anyone going up against the wall, and there's actually very little propaganda around. There is some, and it's obviously pro-revolution and pro-socialism, but it's not everywhere like you might expect, like North Korea or something. And, certainly the average person has access to American TV through antennas and stuff like that, TV coming from Miami. I mean, even Cuban TV is pretty free. They show American stuff. They don't show adverts, but they show American programs. I watched Tango and Cash while I was there. They had new episodes of The Big Bang Theory, so it's not as if outside voices are being suppressed. In fact, I had a conversation with someone about Ali G. What? On telling this guy I was from England, he started talking about Ali G. That hasn't been on TV in 15 years. Definitely going to watch some Ali G now. But looking around Havana, it's very clear that Cuba is going to open up a lot more. Havana seems to rely quite heavily on tourism, and I imagine that will only increase. And despite that, there was relatively little hassle. It was quite frequent, but it was always friendly. And I walked around Havana night and day. I walked through very rundown areas and non-touristy areas, and it always seemed safe. I never felt unsafe. And okay, I wasn't going around as a single woman, no, not all the time, but I felt fine. I never felt threatened. I never felt pressured by people on the street who were talking to me or asking for money or anything like that. And there were hardly any cops. Actually, considering it's a capital city, I hardly saw any police and virtually no military. And the ones I did see, the only people I talked to were the Capitol building's guards. So the people stood outside with the guns. I asked one guy where the post office was. He was drinking like a Ribena carton of rum. It's called, what's it called, Silver Dry. I had a carton of it, 36%. It's pretty good. You buy it for $1. He was drinking that. He was absolutely pissed off his face. So, what can I say about Havana? What have I learnt with my limited experience? Well, I guess the Cuban people make it. They are genuinely nice. Is there a lot to do? No. Is it worth going to? Definitely worth going to see. I kind of feel like I went there a bit late. I think it would have been much more interesting 10 years ago. But obviously 10 years ago I was just starting high school. But obviously 10 years ago I was just starting high school, so I couldn't go. Because I'm only 22 now. Does high school start when you're 12? I don't know. So those are my impressions of Cuba. And it's certainly a country I would like to go back to just to see how it's changed after the Castros die. So I'm back, and I'll be back to doing my normal videos, so make sure you check them out. Hasta luego!